Hi, kids. It's the 1021 podcast. It's the show where we make lists and talk about them, mostly based around movies. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined as always by Jen.
Hey,
Oh, it seems like for both of us, it's been quite the week.
it's been a long one. I feel like, yeah, honestly, feels like it's been a month since we've had our last conversation.
Yeah, yeah, that's I'm right there with you, and I didn't do us any favors by opening up the window, the door, the roof to our our list this week being so inclusive.
It, it's a bit, uh, it's a bit, well, you know, it's funny because I think about this, like, I think about a lot of other things, when people say, well, who's your favorite or what's your favorite, you know, line, yeah, from a movie, or what's your favorite trope in movies, and like, it's so hard without context, but
Hmm.
when you really have to drill down on it, um there's some truths, there's some hardcore uh goodness. So it'll be interesting to see what we kind of come up with together as who are these what is master of horror, like how do you get there, because I feel like that's a pretty coveted title, you
And
know.
I think it's one that, as I know for a fact, everybody that we're going to listen to, whether alive or dead, does listen to the show,
See, there you go.
so they'll be very happy to hear that they're being recognized on the 1021 lists.
Yeah, not only do we broadcast this in podcast format, but I always have a seance board in front of me, and I'm
Hmm.
always contacting the other side because, they need entertainment too. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
We are the
so it's good.
exclusive content providers for the Afterlife waiting room, as seen in Beetlejuice, pumped right into the speakers.
And this is why yeah, well, okay, we won't say whether it's going to heaven or hell. We'll just say the afterlife and leave it there.
Yeah. So it's up to you to decide whether you want to listen to us for eternity, whether that means go out and do whatever you want or follow very strict rules.
I mean, I have my own opinions, but I'll keep them to myself. So,
This is definitely not the show for that yet.
maybe we'll get there eventually.
Hey, I would not be opposed to top 10 movies about the afterlife.
Oh, that would be fun, actually. There's some good ones too.
Hmm. I do like me some afterlife movies. But that's not this show. Tonight's all about the masters of horror and not just, the usual suspects, although I assume some of them are going to show up. But this also has a lot to do with maybe some people that you don't recognize name wise, or maybe you do, but you don't know why we would consider them masters of the genre. So
Mm.
we're going to be talking about that. So would you like me to start things off?
Yeah, why don't you? That sounds like a good idea.
All right. My number 10 is a writer. He writes horror movies.
You don't say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the movie I chose for my list is called The Faculty.
Ooh, I love that movie.
It is a fun movie, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, the reason I chose this and not one of his more mm, wider known mainstream, I guess you could say, flicks is
Hmm.
because, well, everyone talks about his other movies, but The Faculty has such a special place for me because it's a school that's being overrun by aliens that take over their teachers' bodies, and the kids have to fight back, fighting against the faculty. But the person that wrote them is named Kevin Williamson, and he also wrote and developed Scream. Maybe you've heard of that series.
Indeed.
Plus, he wrote Scream 2, Scream 4 as well, and the first I Know What You Did Last Summer. He also wrote Cursed, and let's see, Teaching Mrs. Tingle. So he's, as much as I love the faculty, I think when people say Kevin Williamson, as far as in regards to Masters of Horror, yes, they're going to bring up how he sort of revitalized the slasher genre, right? With
Yeah.
Scream, just pumped new life into this story, that started decades earlier. The style, I should say, but it was the faculty where I think the uniqueness of his talent was on full display. 1988, directed by Robert Rodriguez, starring Josh Hartnett, the late 90s heartthrob of the time, and Elijah Wood, the sort of late 90s every nerd.
Frodo.
I guess he was in some movie about jewelry too.
Little bit. Yeah.
But yeah, that is why Kevin Williamson is my number 10 Master of Horror.
Okay. I went in a slightly different direction for some of my list in the sense that it'll take a little picking out in order to get there. But this first one is pretty easy. I chose a man. I chose a man. Yeah. Okay. I chose a woman by the name of, yeah. That was really unfortunate, and I am so sorry because, yeah, not good. I chose a woman by the name of Aiko Ishioka.
Oh,
Um,
snap.
do you have her as well?
No, but uh, you're, I sense you're going for like some real mastercraft here, and I dig it.
Okay, so Aiko Ishioka is, so the talent level that you get in horror is, let's just face it, very varied, right? Because we have, and this is what makes the genre so great. We have things that run the gamut from low B movies, which, very, just really basic concepts running around, to really big budget and sort of amazing epic designs. And costuming is no accident in horror, that both gives characters signature looks but also adds mood and intent. And I feel like this particular designer is unbelievably amazing at costume design. I would like to just give, a quick shout out to especially movies like Midsummer, where the costuming is absolutely the movie. I mean, the movie, you can't separate the costuming from the movie. But in the one that I'm going to talk about, which ironically I also feel kind of the same, the costuming is the movie. I had this like really powerful connection to the costuming. It was Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the designer was Aiko Ishioka. Um, okay, now she actually died in 2012, which is really sad. Um, she in bringing together the 1992 version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the the costuming in that movie is so iconic that if you were to show someone any character in those costumes, you would immediately know who they were. That's how big that influence was. And it didn't really stop there. Although, some of these are not movies that I feel like people would know about, but um, she did The Cell, which wasn't the best of movies. But she did a movie called Teresa, the Body of Christ, which is also amazing in its costuming. She did the movie which kind of got bombed at the box office, but it was still a good movie, called Immortals, which also costuming second to none. And she also did another movie called Mirror Mirror. Um, that body of the Mirror Mirror one is actually the Snow White story, and it's kind of amazing. Um, and it falls into the Brothers Grimm scary story. Immortals is kind of a it's kind I mean it's a Greek tragedy, but yeah, it's kind of scary. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't quite work as a horror movie. But Luke Evans was in it, and then he also went on to play Dracula, so I'll just use that as my segue, or as my tether thread. But it is definitely Bram Stoker's Dracula that makes me think that all the movies that she did afterwards were heavily influenced by what she was able to put together in that body of work, and it is spectacular enough that I have never seen its like repeated. I have never seen anyone put together a costuming ensemble that works inside of a movie the way that that particular movie worked with Dracula. So she gets my number 10 choice.
Excellent choice. I have to admit I don't have any costumers on my list.
There's also a great book that kind of goes through um, that goes through uh, directions that she had, and it's truly amazing. I mean, like there's there are some people in this world that are just sort of behind the scenes. We never hear about them, but they really make or break our movies. That aren't just the director, that aren't just the people that get the most celebrated roles. And in horror, that's especially prevalent, because it really takes a lot to make a movie feel like it has that scary tone to it. And costuming is a big one.
You're absolutely right about that. Costuming from can be super iconic. Looking at the Freddy Kruegers and the Jason Voorhees. It doesn't matter what character you see those things on, you instantly know who they are. So yeah, costuming is a super duper big deal, especially when it comes to horror.
Yeah, and it's interesting because to me, costuming also is such an under. I won't say it's underappreciated. I do feel like people appreciate it, but there isn't the same kind of vocal appreciation for costuming, unless you're watching like the Academy Awards or something like that. But
Or
generally,
listening to 1021.
we don't tend to celebrate these people very much, and they really do. Like we were talking about, Memoirs of a Geisha the last time that you and I talked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, th- there is something amazing about being able to identify that real people are behind the designs. That these designs are not just arbitrary. That they're not pulling stuff off the rack. These are really somebody's really putting thought into that, and I love that. Absolutely love it.
Very attention to detail based,
Yes, yes, very.
just like my
So,
number 9.
so yeah, I was gonna ask. So what is your number 9?
Well, my number 9 is a makeup artist.
Mm.
There are not a ton of movies out there that
Wait, is it makeup artist or is it? or is it like special effects makeup, as in like that's part of the VFX?
Well, I'm gonna say his title does specifically mention makeup artist, but it also has to do with effects.
Okay.
The one in particular I'm talking about is Dick Smith.
What is Dick Smith famous for?
I would say in this field, he's probably most notable for The Exorcist.
Oh.
I mean, it's The Exorcist, right? It's one of the creepiest, spookiest movies ever made. It led to um, what protests? It led to people being physically ill in the
Yeah.
theater. And people walked out, passing out. Uh, tears, a lot of tears were shed when, when The Exorcist came out. And it had a lot to do with the work of Dick Smith and how he manages to turn a sweet little girl into a demon. And the absolute horror show. Uh, I don't know if that counts as a pun or not, but I'm going to lean into it. But it's the makeup um, from this film is absolutely exquisite. It holds up to this day, and we're talking about what 1973,
Yeah, 73.
73, and it still holds up. Now I got to be honest, when it comes to The Exorcist, I didn't see it until it was re-released in theaters, and I thought it was an absolute laugh riot. Um, not necessarily because of the movie itself, but because by that point, for me, it had been hyped up to be this big uber scary thing, and um, I don't know, maybe it's the whole religious aspect where I'm like, oh, this just seems silly, you know. But when it came to the actual interactions but between the priest and the demon, it was like, okay, this is intriguing, and I'm getting not necessarily freaked out, but my stomach was a bit knotted as I saw the grotesqueness of a child with. I don't even want to really go into detail with it. Um, all that to say, Dick Smith. I mean, he did things like The Godfather. You know, he did The Deer Hunter. He did all these things. Death Becomes Her.
He did Scanners.
He, yeah, he did a Cronenberg movie.
Yes.
Um,
Did you know that there's an actual series in development from HBO with Cronenberg at the helm that
no, I did
is
not.
it's based on Scanners. Yes, there's a Scanners series that's in development right now.
I'm gonna have to put that one on a watch list. Keep track on that. Set a Google alert.
I have a feeling that that is definitely going to be good. But that, bringing up the makeup in Scanners is also basically what made the movie scary. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in Scanners. Let's be serious. That's a freaky concept, no matter how you slice it up. But the makeup in Scanners is absolutely terrifying, and it was done at a time in what, 1981, I think, or 80s, 80, 81, when practical effects were everything. We just
Yeah.
didn't have access to CG the way that we have access to CG, so practical effects became super important, and people melted on screen, and that was all makeup. It was amazing. So yeah, hats off to Dick Smith.
I will say, looking at his partial filmography as it's listed here, in the movies that I've seen, minus say The Godfather, or Taxi Driver, or The Deer Hunter, these major Academy Award winning motion pictures. When it comes to the more horror films on his resume, it seems like he did a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to freaking people out.
Yeah.
And that's why he's my number 9, Master of Horror.
Nice.
What do you have? What do you have, Jim?
Okay, so my number 9 is a little bit maybe unconventional. I don't know. I guess my whole list is unconventional, but I chose Evil Dead as my number 9 movie, and my master of horror in it is none other than Bruce Campbell. The reason that I chose him to e- embody a master of horror is because I have never felt like anyone has ever gotten the connection between horror and comedy so right. How can something that is funny also be scary? How can something that is scary be funny? And it is hands down Bruce Campbell's delivery of every single line, of even things that should be truly horrific. There's a little kernel of something that is funny in it. Um, Arguing with your hand, smashing your mini me's.
Who's laughing now?
Oh my god, there are so many moments. In fact, I have to say that throughout the franchise, I, I mean, it's just the whole franchise is amazing. But Army of Darkness, which I thought was going to be like borderline, how are you going to even make this funny, was one of the funniest movies I've ever seen. I think because it was. I mean, we still quote lines in that all the time when we can't find
Hail to the
something.
king, baby.
We're when we can't find something, we'll say the Nick2 line. Um, y- or if you give somebody the wrong thing, you'll say, "Well, it's mostly right."
Did you say the words?
I mean, there's just so much that's like iconic about the Evil Dead, which is all. Yes, it was great writing, so we can't forget that part. But it's Bruce Campbell. I can't think of another person who could be Bruce Campbell, who could replace Bruce Campbell and say these things and have us actually believe it. Like there's something so authentic about his performance that just makes me so happy. And I have to say that when I watched the series, I had low expectations for it, and it turned out amazing. It turned out absolutely amazing. It was just the perfect blend of that comedy, laughing at itself
Mm-hmm.
while being spooky and scary, and really playing with things that are horror filled, that are the nightmare fuel that we just love to be reminded of. Um, so he gets my number 9. I cannot think of a world at this point in the horror genre without that subcategory, and Evil Dead holds such a huge part of that subcategory. You can't talk about horror comedy without talking about Evil Dead. So, good job, Bruce.
My happy place is Jacksonville, Florida.
God, I love him so much.
Well, I guess you want to hear about my number 8.
Let's hear it.
No,
Okay, let's not hear it.
because what can I say that you haven't said already? Except I didn't pick the Evil Dead. I picked My Name is Bruce. Because my number 8
Oh,
is Bruce Campbell. So close to having them And honestly, I changed Bruce from number 9 to number 8 right before the show.
That's super interesting, actually.
I chose My Name is Bruce to encapsulate the awesomeness that is Bruce Campbell, because it's one of those times where he gets to sort of play himself as the icon of, B movie horror films.
Right.
And if there was ever a display to show what Bruce Campbell, or who Bruce Campbell is, other than Evil Dead, uh, I would go to My Name is Bruce, where he, does all of the standards, as it were. But the thing about Bruce Campbell is, he's been that guy in tons of things. Whether it's showing up in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies as just, random guy, or a hot dog vendor in a certain sorcerer movie.
Yeah,
Whether
right.
it's
That was great, actually.
it goes beyond that too, with things like Bubba Hotep, another awesome uh, genre bending flick. But Bruce Campbell, icon, legend, master.
Indeed.
That's why he's my number 8.
So, okay, so when I move on to my number 8, it actually dovetails perfectly with Bruce Campbell on both accounts, because my number 8 is Sam Raimi.
Mm.
And I didn't choose a specific movie for Sam Raimi, although I suppose that, if I had to, if you held a gun to my head, I might be able to. But his filmography it's kind of enormous, and it's also really difficult to pick just one that's kind of super awesome. Um, and not everything that he's done is horror, which also makes things a little bit interesting. But the things that he does do are, and the things that he touches, even as producer. I mean, he was the producer on The Grudge. He was the producer on a movie that's like so little celebrated, which I super love, called The Messengers. Um, he was also the producer on the movie 30 Days of Night, which I absolutely adore. Um, what was the other one that I thought was so cool? Oh, recently he did the Netflix movie called Night Books, which is kind of a kids. It's like a revamped take on a Hansel and Gretel story, where it kind of ups the stakes a little bit, and then sort of almost morphs into Alibaba, not Alibaba, Arabian Nights. But it's really good. And in any event, it's really good. Everything that Sam Raimi decides to kind of be a part of usually turns out really good. There's only a couple of things I can think of that like he's done that I go, no, you know what? What were you doing? That doesn't seem like a really great idea. And even those feel kind of subjective. So he gets my number 8 pick. I don't think that the horror genre would be the same without Sam Raimi, because his contributions have been just so wide reaching. So there we go.
And let's of course not forget, not horror related, but still fun, Xeno Warrior Princess. Huh?
Yes. Although since we were talking about movies, I didn't. I decided that was more TV.
Yeah, yeah. It's more of a topic for tomorrow, TV dinners. Um,
I think the most underrated movie that Sam Raimi did as a director, which I wish more people would have given a chance to be good or see it and think it was good, was Drag Me to Hell, because
ah,
it's so funny. I mean, it's so in your face. There's so much in your face sarcasm in it, and it's done so deadpan and this is why I think sometimes it's hard for us to separate out Bruce Campbell with the Sam Raimi influence, it's 100% Sam Raimi in there, but it is, but we're missing a Bruce Campbell in it to, like, wink, wink, nod, nod. This is funny, and instead the lines are just deadpan, but they're no less funny. And the overall affect of it is this just surreal kind of look at what we will do both for success and what we'll do to each other to get rid of suffering for ourselves. I mean, it's perfect. It's just absolutely wonderful. So, had to give a quick shout out there.
Sam Raimi is an excellent choice for your number 8. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie. My number 7 doesn't have quite the lineage in the genre as your number 8, but I think he's well on his way to really make an impact.
Nice.
My number 7 is not necessarily old school. He's not necessarily new school, but he is kind of paving his own way and opening up the genre to be more inclusive, less exploitive, and definitely bringing the A game as far as production goes. I'm talking about Jordan Peele.
Oh, good choice.
It has been
As
go
as a
ahead.
director
Mhm.
or as a writer, or okay.
Well, you can really go either way.
True. I'm just trying to figure out from the list whether you chose him as director or writer.
I chose him as a writer and director.
Okay.
Ooh. But it has been a long time since somebody has not only made horror sort of, or I should say, a little intellectual horror, psychological horror, mainstream, but to do it in a way that is as broadly appealing as he has, checking a lot of quadrants, checking a lot of different demographics, and just making really good horror films. I I say he's well on his way to becoming one of the masters. So this is less of a okay. This guy, he is an absolute master at what he does. I'm saying what he's done so far has demonstrated master quality, and if the trend continues, he will not only maintain the title of a master, but also become an icon of the genre. That's something only time can really tell on, though. Uh,
I
my
totally agree.
my choice for the list is Get Out. He won an Oscar for writing this, but the follow ups, while admittedly us not as um, immediately grabbing as Get Out was, still very good. And I admittedly haven't seen Nope. Still on my to watch list, but from what I understand, it's also very good. So I'm really leveraging
Yeah,
uh,
Nope is good.
this pick on his potential, and that's
Okay.
why Jordan Peele is my number 7.
Okay, and let me also add that while in the beginning, I'm a huge fan of Candyman, huge. So when I heard that Jordan Peele was going to be doing a sequel to Candyman, I was pretty excited. And there, I don't, you know, man, I hate to sound like that guy because I don't like that, but I'm, I'm gonna anyway. Um, so I guess I don't hate it that much. Um, b- the sequel to Candyman by Jordan Peele, first of all, tackles a kind of um, both structural and racial inequality, which is sometimes horror does its best metaphors when the subject matter is deep enough to really pull out nuances. And so a lot of times we get horror that deals with mental health, because it's one of those nebulous things that is really difficult to define, but we're able to visually kind of connect the dots and make it engaging and make it real to people. Um, I mean, I can't even tell you how often I can immediately spot that. But Candyman does something totally different, and Jordan Peele nails it here. He talks about in the movie basically it's the gentrification of what was once Caprese Greens, and it works in a way that is so grounded in reality, and yet that crazy surrealism that you also get in like a movie like Get Out. There's something that is very subversive about his ability to put horror together in these stories that is unique. And I think that that's why we like Jordan Peele so much, um, because because that's a skill. That is not an easy thing to write, direct, produce, be a part of. It is it really takes a lot of intellect, and it takes a lot of artistic quality to get there. I also just want to say that the other one that I loved by him was the one called You. I think it was called You, right? Um, it was oh no, I'm sorry. Well, yes, there was that one too. Um, what was that one? What was the other movie that he did right after Get Out? Wasn't that called You?
Us.
Us. Oh my god. Why am I thinking it's You? Thank you. Because that one also it's a I heard a lot of people say it was too difficult for them to kind of follow, that it felt a little too meandering. I don't think that that was actually, it wasn't meandering as much as it was, there's a lot in there. And it really developed a lot of structure that required the audience to pay attention kind of deeply. Um I absolutely loved it. Also, Jordan Peele was a pretty big part of one of my other favorite TV shows, since we were talking about that before. He helped produce Lovecraft Country, which I
Mhm.
absolutely loved from the top down. So that was a good choice, because I agree. He is definitely one of the people that I think in 10 and 15 years we will be looking back on going, man, from the body of work, this guy is absolutely a master of horror.
Agreed.
Good choice. Good
So will
choice.
your number 7 match up?
Okay, so my number 7 actually surrounds a little known, well, not little known, if you know her, you know her. But maybe for today's audience, you may not have heard of her. Her name is Faye Ray. Wray. Uh she unfortunately passed on in, I don't know, 2000 and something. She was an amazing actress. And the reason that I chose her is because, from the horror perspective, no one has dethroned Faye Ray as the Scream Queen. She is absolutely just the top of that game. Um, Her filmography is enormous, and most of her films, where she gets credit that in any big way, were horror movies. Spooky shorts. She did so many movies where she was like the damsel in distress. She was even in I believe she was even in King Kong. Yeah, she was in King Kong. In Canada, where she was from, there's a fountain that is supposed to be kind of like a a monument sort of to her, and it has it's like the mountain, but it's King Kong. I just love that. I just feel like that is just so cool. Um, we in horror, there's plenty of screen. There's plenty of scream queens, and they kind of cycle from year to year. We get like a new crop of sort of, yeah, these are the people to watch in horror, but she had the test of time. And also she was just the classiest person. S- Absolutely brilliant, really brilliant. So she definitely gets my pick as I just think that from if we're looking at from the masters of horror, from the top down and from the bottom up, you almost can't include a list that doesn't have scream queens in it because they're that important to the genre. So that's who I chose.
That's quite an amazing choice there.
I really, really, really. If you ever get I mean, her filmography is so big. It's. I don't know. There's got to be 50 movies in here, but she's famous enough to, as an example, be mentioned in the lyrics for Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like that, it's just the iconic nature of who Fay Wray was is so deeply ingrained in Hollywood retrospective that if you look back at any film that was done prior to 1960, um, Fay Wray was a part of it. I mean, like it's just that there were that many films that she was a part of. So she gets that choice. She gets that pick.
That was your number 7. Um,
That was my number 7.
I guess I'll move on to my number 6. My number 6 is a guy that, well, let's put it this way. He has no, not that I see here anyway, no writing credits to his name. He's not a director. Hell, he's barely an actor.
Hmm.
But he is almost single-handedly responsible for the modern face of horror,
Oh.
bringing us in this slot. I put down Happy Death Day.
Happy Death Day was so underrated. That was good.
I love me some time loop movies. I also enjoy good horror comedy, and this was very good at both. But he wasn't a, I'd say he wasn't a creative force behind it as much as a guy that knows how to put these things together. Talking about producer Jason Blum.
Huh? I actually I switched it out at the last minute because I actually have another one in place for it, but I actually have a spot on my list for a production company. And Blumhouse almost made it onto that list, but I chose a different one.
Well, I
Great
went with
minds think alike, Josh.
Bruce Campbell agrees. Shout out to you, Bruce. I know you're listening. Uh, Jason Blum, Blumhouse. Um, what can you say? Ever since Paranormal Activity, everything, well, not everything he's touched, but he has just made such an impact in the horror world. The Paranormal Activity movies, Insidious,
Right.
Oculus, Creep, the Purge movies, Whiplash, which was a different type of horror. No, seriously, Whiplash is a great movie. All of these just insane horror movies over the last, what, 10, 15 years? There's a
Hmm.
good chance that this guy's name is attached to it. Why? Because Jason Blum knows how to put these things together. As a producer, he, uh, he holds some responsibility for helping to put together a team to bring us stories. And over the last, like I said, 10, 15 years, his focus has gone from things like, Tom Thumb and Thumbelina, which, guess what? He was a producer on, all the way down to where are we at now? Let's see. I know Blumhouse is doing Five Nights at Freddy's, the recent Halloween movies, Mr. Harrigan's Phone. That was on Netflix, and I really enjoyed that.
That was good.
Black Phone, another movie that just has gotten rave reviews for being an almost a step up in what horror's been lately, just kind of helping make the genre pivot into an incredible direction. And mind you, they're not all super winners, but you know what? The fact that Jason Blum has almost become synonymous with horror in the 21st century, I think speaks volumes about his impact on the genre, and mostly through his production company. So that is why Jason Blum is my number 6.
As a master of horror, I mean, anybody who knows anything about horror looks for Blumhouse Productions as the opening, um you know I don't know what to call it, but basically, like, during your opening credits, as you're seeing who the movie was produced by, Blumhouse Productions, I think it's more people excited than almost any other one of those. you know oh God, do we have to sit through all of these? How many people produced this?
Between them
But
and A24, yes.
well, okay, so interestingly enough, A24 is actually that is on my list. But I'll get to that in a minute. And I'll tell you why in 1 second.
Okay.
May not be for the reason that you think it is for. But I'll explain it in a moment. But I'm going to go to we're at number 6, right?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go to my number 6 pick. My number 6 pick is a okay. The, this is difficult because the movies that he's done some movies, but he's best known, I think, for Netflix miniseries. His name is Mike Flanagan, and like you, I think that this guy deserves some accolades and shout outs, as in 10, 15, 20 years, we will look back at Mike Flanagan's body of work and say, you absolutely recrafted horror in a way that I don't necessarily know that it would have gone without that vision. Mike Flanagan did the first thing I ever saw Mike Flanagan do was Oculus, and I absolutely was enthralled by the idea, by the relationship between the brother and the sister, by what really was happening and how that slow reveal came to pass. It's crazy when you start messing with reality, and when you assign sentience to an inanimate object. It to me, that is really terrifying. And I'm not talking Beauty and the Beast stuff. I'm talking, like, something has a sinister sentience to it, and it is really out to get you. It's kind of crazy, but he definitely pulled it off, and it was unbelievably suspenseful. And then I didn't see anything from Mike Flanagan again, or at least I didn't think I did, but of course I did, but I didn't know that it was him until Doctor Sleep. Now, Doctor Sleep actually came out in 2018. And it's weird that I saw Doctor Sleep before I saw Haunting of Hill House, but that was the way that I saw it. Doctor Sleep was amazing as just the theatrical cut. I absolutely loved it, based on a Stephen King novel. Really, really, really good. The director's cut, or the extended edition, however you want to say it, is so much better, and you can feel Mike Flanagan's influence in it. You get a direction out of it that you just don't get from the theatrical cut. It's really, really, really good. But then when you start getting into the Netflix, Mike Flanagan has his own section on Netflix for his horror. He did Haunting of Hill House. He did Haunting of Bly Manor. He did The Midnight Club, which is the one that just passed, and he did one called Midnight Mass. Midnight Mass is actually one of my favorites. I can't really explain to you why it is. It just touches every note that I love. Um, it's a vampire story, but it's not a vampire story. It's a story about isolation and being afraid. It's about the isolation of the human experience and then what that does to people. God, it's just so good. And honestly, there is something about Mike Flanagan's style that, similar to another person on my list, from a directorial standpoint, screams excellence in horror. He knows exactly when to make the thrill, and he knows exactly how to use the scare in kind of the best way possible. I can't tell you how many times after we watched The Haunting of Hill House, we just walked around in, dark hallways when we would be passing each other and just say bent neck lady, and it would send, shivers up everybody's spine. That's how incredible his presentation of little iconic pieces in his movies were. So he gets my number 6 pick. I really think that he absolutely has earned a seat at the horror table as, yeah, you got this.
It's funny. You basically talked about a lot of movies, uh, except the one that I saw from him,
Oh.
and that's Gerald's Game.
Oh, right. Gerald's Game was another Netflix, right?
I have to say, when it comes to Gerald's Game, I read the book, and to me, the book was a lot of, oh, this it's about this woman that's trapped under her dead husband, handcuffed to a bed. And yeah, there's more to the story than that, but that's pretty much the gist of it. But when I saw that there was a movie, I was like, how are they going to make a movie about this? It's so low key, and I don't see it tying to Dolores Claiborne like the book does. But it had me hooked.
It was good.
It was so good, and I hadn't even noticed that it was Mike Flanagan. I was like, oh, it's a Stephen King story, so yeah, of course I'm going to watch it. And I haven't gotten around to Doctor Sleep yet because I haven't gotten around to reading the book, and I prefer to do that first. So there's that.
I will say, just by way of, should you read the book? Doctor Sleep is a book. I love you, Stephen King. I will always love you. Doctor Sleep was not my favorite Stephen King book. It is a little, unless you really, really want to read um, the nuances, which I don't. I mean, like, I go back and forth because I do think, of course, they're good and they're worth celebrating. It's a little bit like reading The Shining before you watch The Shining. In some ways, I kind of wish that I had just seen the movie before I had read the book, because the book is significantly different in the way that the hotel is presented. Now, interestingly, in Doctor Sleep, right, the Shining, the Overlook Hotel is actually in Doctor Sleep. It plays an integral role. So there's this aspect to Doctor Sleep that, it, like, you have to be. I think you kind of have to be careful to manage your expectations if you're going to read the book before you see the movie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. When they said there was going to be a sequel to The Shining, I was like, wait, what? But my curiosity was piqued. I just have yet to actually get to it. Put the eyes on the words.
I hear you.
But I guess that means we're breaking into top 5 territory.
We are.
Hit the music.
Dun dun dun. Oh no, wait,
Top
that's Netflix.
5. So my number 5 to be in this top 5 is definitely an icon, definitely one of the greatest horror directors of all of the times. Also, pretty darn good writer too. Also, kind of spiffy composer as well. And I know what you're thinking. How number 5? How number 5? 5? Well, I'm telling you, John Carpenter is my number 5. Yes, everyone's going to talk about Halloween. Honestly, the Halloween franchise has been all over the place. So, you know what? Take it for what it is. My pick to showcase John Carpenter is the 1988 classic starring Rowdy Roddy Piper, They Live.
Choice. I just read an article about how you could basically pick up the entire story of They Live, drop it into any movie today, and it totally withstands the test of time. It is absolutely spot on, no matter how you really. The only thing that dates that movie is some of the effects and a couple of the choices that they make for costuming and who the people are. That's it. Everything else is perfect. I mean, we don't have some of the things in there that they we could just easily change them up, but the messaging is absolutely pitch perfect.
And still relevant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the thing about John Carpenter is, like I said, everybody knows him for Halloween and then the music, and that's all great. But a career that not just spans the one genre, but the fact that he does everything so well and is still mostly known as a horror icon from Halloween, They Live, Christine. I believe you mentioned The Fog in the past.
The Thing.
The Thing. I know that's one of your favorites.
It is.
Prince of Darkness. Just looking at everything he's done. What more can one person do to add to the legacy of a genre? You'd be hard pressed to find somebody with quite the credentials. Although I guess apparently I've done it 4 more times. John Carpenter will forever be associated with horror, and I don't think anybody will ever question that. Like I said, people might be a little upset that I have them, in their opinions, so far down on my list, but just the idea of a world without John Carpenter is it's unthinkable. No Halloween, there would be an entire several decades slates worth of movies just erased from existence.
Right.
Without The Thing, same thing. What he's done not only stands the test of time, guarantee you put Halloween and you put the original Halloween up against any slasher flick from the last 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be, it'll still hold its own against it, and in many cases surpass it.
So okay, so this brings up an interesting point because I'm gonna tell you who my next choice is, and let's do a quick comparison between the two because I
Okay.
feel like these are two very similar lines of thought. Um, my number five is George Romero, and I chose George Romero because I mean, of course, Dawn of the Dead was like a thing. It absolutely made something happen in terms of igniting the zombie apocalypse, if you will. But then Night of the Living Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, um, each one of those movies sort of like captured a different aspect of that kind of terror. Now, when it comes to Carpenter, his brand of terror, his brand of horror is very mired in practical effects and the scariness of the subject matter, right? Um, George Romero, very similar. It is all about the makeup and prosthetic effects, which are very practical effects. It's all about the sense of creeping dread. It's not necessarily about, being sort of like uh scary, like jump scare a minute. It's more like there's an existential dread happening here. You can't escape it. What are you going to do? And the choices that the living make are very interesting. And I feel the same way about George Carpenter. I'm George Carpenter about um John Carpenter. I feel that same sense of John Carpenter puts his characters into situations where the dread itself is slow moving most of the time, but unpredictable and wildly inescapable. And for that, it sort of occupies a very specific genre of horror storytelling that many horror stories don't execute very well. They try to put their characters into situations that are inescapable, but we as the audience sometimes even recognize or go, duh, why didn't they just do this or do that? And I feel like Carpenter and Romero do something similar where it's inescapable, not because you can't escape the one situation you're in, but because the creeping terror is eventually going to get you. A little bit like the modern kind of version of this would be It Follows, where it's not that you're in peril immediately, although you could be. It is about the inescapableness of the terror that you're in. And I love that. I just absolutely love it. I think that's one of the reasons that The Thing is so scary. You don't know who it is, what it is, where it is, why it is. You just know that you don't want to be assimilated by it. You don't want to be taken by it because that is that's the scary part. What do you think?
Such a very, very broad topic and uh, open-ended question. I don't know where to begin.
I mean, do you think that they okay, so let me put it to you this way then. Let's
Okay.
try this. Do you think that because I think I can see the influences of John Carpenter um from George Romero. I can
Hmm.
see I think you can see that with a lot of horror directors and producers and writers, right? You can see the influence of George Romero.
Uh huh.
But where John Carpenter kind of took a Romero-esque idea, he definitely one-upped the idea by creating situations for his characters where horror was inescapable. You have to confront horror in John Carpenter's movies. You can't run away from it. And in the same there's a similar feeling that you get in George Romero's movies, but it's not as pronounced as John Carpenter's. In John Carpenter's movies, horror is, it's not just out to get you, it's inescapable. And I feel like that influence comes from the George Romero idea of inescapable horror. Does that make sense?
So to see if I'm tracking this right, the idea of, say, a Michael Myers that is constantly on the move, and it's a force that's out to get you. Um,
Correct.
but it's something in Carpenter's movies. It's uh, definitely something you can fight, even if it's futilely. But you can stand up to it. Whereas, excuse me, the influence from Romero would be the fact that, yes, it is something. There is something that is that's out to get you. But in Romero's world, it's more of the world that you're in that is out to get you, and it's inescapable. But and not quite just
Right.
the the singular force that you have to fight against.
Right, because I do, to some degree, I do think that in a lot of George Romero's movies, it feels like we are in an alternate reality. It
Hmm.
feels as if reality has taken a slight detour down a different hallway, and here's the horror. In John Carpenter's movies, we experience, I think, a pinpoint realism, and the horror is inescapable, but it's in your face real. There's no, in The Thing, they can't escape. There's no escaping. There's the isolation alone makes the horror movie work 1,000 times better.
Hmm.
But the inescapableness of Michael Myers is just as terrifying, because you can't escape Michael Myers. You have to either confront him or outwit him. Whatever that piece is, that's what makes the terrifying. There is no turn down the hallway to an alternate reality. The world continues to exist just as we see it, but you can't escape the horror in the same way. So it's two offshoots of the same kind of idea, which is kind of amazing, because when you think about John Carpenter's career and then you think about George Romero's career, I mean, if we took both of them sort of out of the horror genre, man, I don't even know what we would be left with, because so many
Nothing.
people have been influenced by both of them, that the entire direction of horror, I think, would be, I don't know what it would be, but it would not be what it is today. I mean, that's what I think.
Well, I think you're right. Without, especially those two individuals, would do you think horror would have even survived out of the or gotten out of the B movie status that it held?
Well, I do, because I would like to, remind myself, and, just sort of like rehash a bit, that people were doing prestige, what they call prestige horror, back in the 1960s. Rosemary's Baby was peak artistic horror. I hate the word prestige horror, because it because it makes me feel like we're assigning a type of intellectualism to genres of film that I don't feel like they need it.
Hmm.
And also, I feel like we sort of substrata the enjoyment that people can get out of different genres simply by separating them out and going, yeah, you probably wouldn't like this because it's this or that. I totally disagree. Um, but I think it could have survived. Remember Suspiria?
Hmm.
So that's another one that feels like, look, it had a lot of, The Exorcist, which we just brought up, had a lot of influence, but in terms of bringing horror mainstream, I think it probably would have been a little bit more relegated to the quote unquote shadows of our entertainment without Romero and John Carpenter together, because they they pulled together that mainstream feeling of it's okay to be scared. We
Yeah.
got you covered. Um, and and that is even before we get into slasher movies, because John Carpenter and George Romero didn't foray too hard into real slasher movies. Um, that is sort of like a separate piece, but they brought to the American audiences a mainstream view of horror, which, yeah, I don't think I feel like it would be sort of like, we would have some movies like Rosemary's Baby and Suspiria, maybe some Poltergeist and, things like that. But they would always sort of be outliers instead of what we have now, which is, Shudder. 24 hours of horror all the time. That's incredible. It's a massive movement toward appreciating the horror genre. So,
That was a well thought out and excellent um, something or other.
I mean,
Words, right?
to anyone who doesn't know me, horror is actually one of my, aside from fantasy epics, which I obviously am extremely passionate about, and there are just not enough of. Horror is one of my most favorite movie genres because it is so eclectic, because it encompasses so much across the board. And I feel like this list that we have created proves that 1,000 times, because we are basically saying, here's some people that have had huge influences on how we enjoy our entertainment. And most of the things that we're talking about are truly household names. We know these people. Even when we don't know them, we know them. You know what I mean?
I do, and I think a couple of my next listees will demonstrate that fact with relevant ease.
All right. Well, I guess we're at number 4 then.
My number 4 is the name of a man who is literally synonymous with the word horror. Not just films. In fact, probably less films and more literary. But I added him to the list not because he is a prolific screenwriter, because not really. Not because he's a prolific horror director, which, no. But because the things that have come from his brain have not only inspired millions of people, not only has inspired countless stories, but also I just think he's a really neat guy. I'm talking about Stephen King.
Of
I,
course.
I couldn't imagine, talking about a masters of horror, no matter what the platform is, uh, without mentioning, at least in passing, Stephen freaking King. His books go on to make, okay, not always super awesome movies, but you know what? The stories are generally up there. It's just a matter of interpretation of whether or not you find them enjoyable. The Shining is considered one of the benchmarks in horror. Stanley Kubrick and King notoriously hates it.
Which is so funny.
But he continues to this day. After getting hit by a van, you know, he retired before that, and then he gets hit by a van, and suddenly he's like, you know what? I'm going to write a book every day.
It
At least that's what it seems like. The man just
does.
produces nonstop, and the really awesome thing about this dude, he doesn't produce garbage. Even his worst stuff's, like, yeah, it was good. He's like, and a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but I am one of those people that thinks, you know what? I don't think the MCU has produced bad movies. I think the worst they've done is okay. So I don't think they've crossed over into bad territory. And just like over what 40, how many years Stephen King has been writing, I don't think I've just personally from what I've read, and I've read a good deal of his bibliography. I don't think I don't think I've ever finished a Stephen King book going, well, I just didn't like it. And the fact that there is a pretty good, yeah, I'd say a pretty good percentage of his adaptions that actually turn out pretty well. Gerald's Game, as we mentioned before, much better than I thought it had any right to be. Carrie, just going back to those iconic moments, not only in horror, but in cinematic history. Tim Curry being Pennywise the Clown in a made-for-TV movie, just legendary. Or the new It movies, also amazing. Misery, Children of the Corn, Pet Cemetery, all of it from Stephen King. Go ahead.
What I think happens here is something which I've had this talk in my house, and especially with how much I love horror. Um, we've had many discussions about why people are so much harder on horror fiction than they are on almost any other genre of fiction, maybe except fan fiction. And part of the issue between bringing horror fiction as an adaptation to the screen is that a lot of horror is inside your head. And if we could go back for a moment to Jordan Peele, John Carpenter, and George Romero, there is a real gift that those people have for being able to visualize the connection between the horror in your head and how to present that in a way that doesn't a give away the store immediately, and b make the horror almost infantile. Little jump scares, things like that. I mean, Mike Flanagan actually had a funny story about Netflix wanting him to do more jump scares, and then he ended up with the Guinness Book of World Records for the most jump scares inside of a series. It's hilarious. I mean, like, it's silly because that's not really the stuff that scares us. It scares us, like, for a moment, but dread, true horror dread, comes from the understanding that Get Out, there's a world where that kind of thinking is still around, where the quest for immortality consumes just human lives, um, where we come face to face with the really scary part of just being human, and then add in some supernatural stuff on top, and it's just layers of, like, a horror Sunday. It's amazing. But that's a gift, and it's not, I don't think, an easy thing to bring forward. And I will be the first one to say that if we go back to somebody else on your list, um Jason Blum, not everything that man touches is gold. It's horror, and oftentimes super interesting, but come on. Some of that stuff is just, I mean, I've seen Blumhouse productions that are just absolutely unbelievably not good, not good. That doesn't mean it doesn't stop anybody from continually making them in the same way that Stephen King doesn't stop making horror that messes with your head.
Mhm.
It's just the adaptation of that can sometimes, I think, be a little bit lost in translation. And Jason Blum is not John Carpenter. Do,
That's why
I,
he's
like
lower
I
on the list.
Yeah, I hate to say that because like I'm not trying to make a direct comparison between the two as much as I'm trying to say there are different elements that go into this, which I feel like depending upon who the director is, who did the adaptation, who is really sort of in charge overall, you can get a really excellent experience like Gerald's Game and 1912, which was actually really good. Or you can get a really weird adaptation like Tommy Knockers and what was the one that I really hated? I forgot. There's one that I really hated. Yeah, but even the one about the cat people, even that movie was like okay. I mean, it's Stephen King. There's cat people in it. Yeah. I, y- I don't know. I think Stephen King is absolutely a master of horror, but I think that what makes Stephen King scary is all about the writing, and oftentimes the movies don't quite work. I wish that wasn't true, but
I mean,
it is.
that's a completely fair analysis.
But
Um,
but if you give me a Stephen King book, I'll read it. I don't care what it's about. I'll read it.
he made my list not necessarily for, directly the productions based on his work, but definitely for the generations over the last 40 some odd years that have been inspired to pursue horror
Right.
in his name.
Well, and I mean, obviously, Mike Flanagan made my list with Doctor Sleep too, as that is definitely a standout. Doctor Sleep is a huge standout. So I mean, it is possible to do Stephen King right. It's just yeah, that I don't know, it takes a vision, that's for sure.
The picture that I decided to honor him with in on this list is Dreamcatcher.
Really, did you like that one?
I thought it was pretty good. And honestly, I picked it because one, everyone would expect The Shining or it, the old standbys, right?
Hmm.
Me, I'm a big fan of Jason Lee, so there, I said it. I picked it because of Jason Lee.
Not Morgan Freeman.
No, not Morgan Freeman.
uh,
SSDD. There you go.
and in some ways the Stephen King horror crossover to sci-fi sometimes can work even a little bit better than some of his straight horror, um it, just because there's a wider latitude for interpretation. So
I have a
interesting.
confession to make.
Yes.
Um, Dreamcatcher, and like I said, it's the movie I picked for Stephen King. My number four spot. It has had very subtle influences on me over the years. Like I now say SSDD, um, but whenever I'm missing something, whenever something's lost, I don't even think about it. Just for some reason, my finger starts twirling, and I kid you not, more often than not, with my finger twirling, I find it very quickly, whatever it
That's
is.
funny.
For. So yeah, that's another way that my life has been influenced in a really weird way. Does your number four have that same influence on you?
Okay, so my number 4, yes, actually it does, but not quite the same. Not quite the same. My number 4 is a master of horror. What is a good way to describe this? Um, well, I'll just say Hammer Films. In terms of being master of horror, I don't think you can possibly think about horror in its early inception with monster movies and all kinds of different spooky creatures without thinking about one Hammer film productions. It was the Hammer films came from basically Britain, but in the 1960s and the 1970s, they had a lock on the creature feature market in almost every single kind of scary category: Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, werewolves, just whatever it was that came out. The 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 most interesting thing I think about Hammer films is not necessarily the movies just themselves as much as it is the legacy of those movies and how they then went on to influence the horror that we know from today. Um, Anybody who is interested in horror pretty much starts with Hammer horror, because it's so incredibly iconic and foundationally based. They really set a lot of the mood for horror going forward. And a lot of the names that are inside of the Hammer horror directors and writers aren't people that people would necessarily know. Not very many people know Don Sharp. Not very many people know Peter Sykes. Not very many people know Jimmy Sangerson, Sangster. But they might know The Curse of Frankenstein. They might know The Horror of Frankenstein. They might know uh, To the what was that one called? To the Devil a Daughter. That was one of them. They might know The Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires. When you tell people the titles, they'll immediately recognize it as a horror, as a Hammer horror film. But it's what Hammer horror sort of encompassed that makes me think of it as this is true masterwork as a production company, as a distributor of horror films, as a purveyor of the horror genre. They, I think, did more for the horror for our current day horror genre than even some of the best directors that we have on our list did, because they also, as I was saying before, made horror more mainstream simply by basically saturating the market with all of the titles that they had. And they're so good. I mean, there are so many good Hammer horror films. It's hard to pick just one that would be like the best. Um, but I mean, almost everybody knows Curse of Frankenstein. Um, I think how many are on the Hammer list? I think there's over 150 on the Hammer list. So it's huge. That to me, there's a lot of staying power in that because the Hammer started in 1935 and sort of its reign kind of ends around 1980, end of the 70s. So that's big. That is absolutely big. And that's why they are on my list, and that's why they're so high up there on the list too.
Sounds absolutely legendary.
They absolutely were. One of my favorites is the Viking Queen, which is just so like it's almost it's hard to describe some of these movies because you feel like they're camp almost, but they're not. I mean, and in the day they were really playing on the creature feature and sometimes there's like, well, not sometimes, there's a lot of overacting going on. But it's still so good. Dracula Prince of Darkness, I mean, it's just legendary, right? Just absolutely legendary. So yeah, I mean, we could do an entire episode on Hammer horror films, because with 150 there's a lot to choose from.
I would have to do a little homework on that.
This is definitely one of those times when if you haven't seen Hammer horror films, go pick a couple out of the collection and take a look at them. You'll understand after seeing 2 or 3 of them the kind of the reason that Hammer horror has kind of its own little iconic spot in the horror industry.
Okay, sounds like an excellent choice for your number 4.
Number 4, yes.
My number 3 is what can I say? Some people are going to disagree with it. A lot of people are going to disagree with its definitely high status on my list, but the movie itself, I don't think anybody would argue. The person that makes my number 3 master of horror is Steven Spielberg. The movie is Jaws. A movie that literally made a large population of people afraid to go into the water because they was scared.
Huh.
Now, I know what you're thinking out there in listener land, but Josh, how can you make somebody a master of horror based off one movie? Okay, first of all, Jaws is iconic on so many different levels. I would say it almost single-handedly brought back the mainstream monster movie. I would argue, I would put this on the table that we wouldn't have any of the major monster movies of the last 20 years if Jaws didn't show up in theaters and just eat the competition at the box office.
That's so true.
Yeah. It was the first summer blockbuster. The first movie that really lit a fire in the masses in the way that it did. Steven Spielberg, of course, rookie director, gets brought on to make a movie about a rubber shark. You know, that could go many ways. But Spielberg is Spielberg, and he made it magic. But he doesn't stop there. No, he goes on to, quote unquote, produce, wink, wink, one of the scariest movies of all time, one of the scariest ghost movies of all time, in my opinion, Poltergeist. He continued to attach his name to the horror genre in some way or another. After all, we know he didn't direct, wink, wink, Poltergeist. He just happened to visit the set a lot, right? But it doesn't stop there. And no, Gremlins is not known as, the super duper horror movie that, a lot of people think about when they hear horror movie. But it's horror, it's comedy, it's Christmas. So who else does a horror comedy Christmas movie in such an adorable way? Nobody. Steven Spielberg made that happen.
All those Stevens.
A lot of Steven. Stephen Colbert is going to be my number 1. Why not? Monster House. How about Jurassic Park? Talking about monsters, dinosaurs. It was scary. While it didn't, I'd say it didn't fall traditionally within the confines of this is a horror movie. It did certainly keep horror elements and made it quite frightening for some younger viewers. Monster House, Casper. The guy not only changed the face of the box office with a horror movie, he also made sure that many more would be available for future generations to come by putting his name on it. Even just as a producer, he helped greenlight not necessarily an entire generation of horror movies, but definitely there is a subcategory with Steven Spielberg's face attached to it. Like, this doesn't exist without Spielberg. And if that doesn't make you a master, not only creating with a hands-on approach as far as putting out horror, but also propagating future horror, I don't know what does. Steven Spielberg is my number 3.
All right. Well, my number 3 is man, my number 2 and my number 1 are so cool. But I'll get to my number 3 first. My number 3 is done A24. Again, another production company. This one I am including in my Master of Horror list because they are the champion of the indie horror picture. A24 has picked up more indie horror movies than I can even count. And the ability of A24 to see into some of the most amazing elements of horror and produce from that, or well, distribute from that, some of just the most iconic titles in horror recently, is kind of amazing. Um, they had Midsummer, they had Hereditary, they had The Green Knight, which I hadn't even really thought of as being a subgenre of horror, but it absolutely is. They had The Lighthouse, which is the Robert Eggers film, which is seriously disturbing. They had It Comes at Night. They have a ton. I mean, there's like a ton. The the reason that indie horror to me is so important, and the one this in particular, that I put them so high up on the list, is that it is, I think, literally indie horror that builds the genre from the inside out. We don't get to hear a lot about indie horror movies unless they become very mainstream, unless they get picked up by Netflix or, become something big. But I have to tell you that I have seen some incredible indie horror movies on Hulu, on different Roku channels that just seem to aggregate titles, and they're unbelievably fantastic. So I won't go too far into it because there's a lot with A24 that starts to feel super technical. But as a production company and as a distributor of horror films, specifically indie horror, they really have a lock on kind of an excellent niche in this market. So they get my number 3.
A24, tremendous powerhouse in indie film, and it makes film geeks everywhere jump up and shout for joy. Excellent choice.
One of the just as a small little shout out, I think sometimes that because we are not focused on it, and rightfully so, we're not supposed to be. The distribution points for any sort of sub genre movie that isn't Disney, that doesn't have its own mechanism to promote itself, um, relies on these production companies and distribution houses to lend their credibility to the film. And when that happens, we get things like Paranormal Activity, which was shot for less than $1 million and went on to become a franchise that, you know, built entire careers, and made people a lot of money. But we don't get that without we it's like we have to have some recognition for some of the technical pr- sort of processes, I guess, to get our horror films into the mainstream. And even when they're not in the mainstream, to get the less noticed films in front of a viewing audience. And that's why I think that some of these production houses really deserve a lot of credit, because that's exactly what they do, you know. I mean, I get excited when I see A24. I even get excited when I see things like Uncorked, because I start feeling like this was somebody's baby. Somebody really wanted this to be made, and you can see that this was somebody's love. And that kind of makes it cool. So, there you go.
Well, like I said, it's down to my number two.
Number 2.
And some might say I'm going out on a limb once again, but since when am I not? Because when people think of horror, you got your slashers, you got your blood and guts, you got your supernatural. There's all sorts of different elements to horror. But one of my favorite things when it comes to that particular genre is the psychological nature of it. I don't think it's really good most of the time if it's not in your head. That's what makes good horror to me, when it really gets inside you and it makes you feel scared. Not jump scares, but setting an atmosphere that really either creeps you out or leaves you just uncomfortable, so that when things happen, it affects you on a deeper level. And my number two has been a master of that for a very long time. My number two is Alfred Hitchcock. And the movie I chose for him is, of course, quintessential in this particular field, Psycho. Hitchcock definitely built a career on leaving the audiences stunned. He was a master of building worlds where you just instantly fall in and you're hooked. These characters, I'm not going to say have tremendous depth, but they are definitely uh, rounded out enough for you to care about what happens to them. So when something bad happens, as with Hitchcock, it inevitably does, whether it's Psycho or The Birds or Rear Window, whatever the case may be, when the stuff hits the fan, you are left wondering what's going to happen next, scared for the people involved. His stories have been told and, in some cases, retold, some to not such great effect, but others, okay, honestly, nobody holds a candle to telling a Hitchcock story like Hitchcock. So when he shows up on set, that you're going to get something that will titillate your psyche and make you feel an array of emotions all the way down to your core. Alfred Hitchcock is a master storyteller in every sense of the word. And that's why he takes my number 2 spot on this list.
That was a good choice. I sometimes forget that Alfred Hitchcock is also considered um, because 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 the nature of Hitchcockian storytelling is so thriller related. Sometimes I forget that it actually has its tendrils in true organic horror. Psycho is a great
Mm-hmm.
example. So is The Birds. Um, that is absolutely horror and super interesting too. My number 2 is okay. So this is where I feel like this is a little bit esoteric, but uh, still important. Um, I and it really gets the Master of Horror designation for me, not because I like who the person is, because I actually dislike who the person is, and I feel conflicted at times, but for the influence of this particular type of horror, I have to give the shout out to Lovecraft. Um, Lovecraftian horror is a very specific fear and awe experience. It is the blending of the universe in all of its expansiveness and how small we are in comparison, and the kind of monumental knowledge that we lack in order to interact with the universe. Um, Most of the Lovecraftian horror that I know of from adaptations involves cosmic power, um, but cosmic power always encapsulated within an individual small story that gives it the sense of gravitas to an individual human or individual humans, and that's what makes it important, because telling the story of Cthulhu is not necessarily, it's scary, maybe, I mean, it's a monster, but it's the understanding of most Lovecraftian monsters as dark overlords, or being able to manipulate humans in a way that, leads to humans being subservient to them. Those kinds of things are sort of amazing. And in fact, just as a quick shout out, a couple of weeks ago we watched a movie on Shudder called Glorious. And it is absolutely Lovecraftian. There is an elder god in a bathroom stall, and the main protagonist has the entire movie set up around having conversations with this elder god in a bathroom stall. The crazy twists and turns, absolutely upending what you think is really happening. It's phenomenal. And it reminds me that even present day storytelling, as we are seeking to tell stories of cosmic import, with different gods and, putting ourselves in proper alignment in the universe, often sort of recant back to H.P. Lovecraft. And th- it's hard because, again, because I feel like H.P. Lovecraft as a person was not a good person. And a lot of Lovecraftian fiction is racist and incredibly, it's just difficult. especially in today's world, it is very difficult to get a handle on it. But then I see movies like Glorious, and it's like it takes the best of what is Lovecraftian and assigns it really good narrative storytelling and removes all the layers of racism and removes a lot of the stuff that makes Lovecraft difficult and problematic. And what you get as a distilled version is that kind of goodness. There's another movie that I believe is still on Netflix. Might be on Amazon, I'm not sure which, but it's called The Void. And The Void is also an incredibly Lovecraftian idea without having to deal with a lot of the problematic features of Lovecraftian fiction, or with Lovecraft's fiction, I should say. But the world of horror would not be the same without H.P. Lovecraft and the H.P. Lovecraft influence. That fiction has such strong narrative ties in so many movies that deal with, again, the cosmic understanding of who we are. We assign a lot of monsters as being eldritch monsters, and for that influence, including movies like Cabin in the Woods, they feel Lovecraftian. And so I feel like that actually, that Lovecraftian fiction deserves a place on this list, and it deserves a high place on the list because that's some of the scariest stuff that I think we face as human beings. So there you go. There's my number 2.
Wow. Oh man, makes my number 1 look like crap.
Uh-oh. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not. If it's related to horror, it definitely isn't.
I don't even. Man. The only reason this is my number 1 is because it's a twofer. That's right. I pulled a Jen.
Good for you.
My number 1 film to represent the Masters of Horror is a Nightmare on Elm Street. To recognize not only the director Wes Craven and the writer Wes Craven, but also the undeniable star Robert Englund. Those are 2 names that, when you think about horror over the last 40 years, should instantly spring to mind. Wes Craven and Robert Englund. Where would the world be without Freddy Krueger? Where would filmmaking be without Spinning Rooms? It's the idea that there is a force, a being, an evil presence, whatever you want to call it, that will attack you when you're at your most vulnerable in your sleep. That really opens up the doors for creativity in the horror process. Setting things in a dream world not only gives you ample material to play with as far as, killing teenagers, but it also lets you do it in a way that lets you expand, enhance, and show off, quite frankly, skills that maybe nobody's ever seen before. Nightmare on Elm Street does all of that. And just recognizing the entire team that helped pull that together and the way it did, as seen in The Movies That Made Us, in Netflix docuseries, was an amazing story. I would love to just see a movie about the making of the movie. But over the last 40 years, Wes Craven has definitely made a name for himself in the genre, whether it's Scream, The Hills Have Eyes, The Last House on the Left, whatever you associate Wes Craven with, it's bound in horror. And Robert Englund, he can live to be 300 years old, and he won't be known as the 300-year-old man. He will be known as the guy that played Freddy Krueger, possibly the most iconic horror icon, the most iconic of the horror icons. Not solely because of his classic Freddy sweater or his classic Freddy glove or his classic Freddy hat, but also the sardonic Freddy wit and his just overwhelming joy in the butchering of teenagers.
So a shout out to the slasher film as well.
That's my number one.
Well, okay. I think that that's actually a good choice. Also because the Nightmare on Elm Street really ushered in a different kind of slasher teen trope that we hadn't had before, and it did, I think, totally change the landscape of horror film of horror movies of horror being told, which is kind of crazy because doesn't even seem like that doesn't seem like that's even possible, but it definitely did. And I have to say that I really love Freddy Krueger's offhanded wit. It is actually pretty funny. Um, I chose okay. This one is tough because I wanted to end my list on someone again who I thought was master of horror as we are sitting here today. Who do I think that we are handing the reins of horror to from a technical standpoint? And one of the things that gets very little praise in my estimation is the the people who do the composing for the music behind our scary movies. And I'm not talking about the super iconic like Danny Elfman and even even John Carpenter, who does a lot of composing himself. Um, I am talking about the people who are behind the scenes doing the work to create our composition that is it is a thankless job, but it matters so much. Mood matters 1,000% in a horror movie. And if you don't have the right soundtrack, and when you don't have the right soundtrack, I should say, if you watch the movie without the soundtrack and it's not scary, or it is scary, and then you put the soundtrack on and it changes the mood, you understand instantly how important the music is. Um, I chose a man named Bear McCreary. Bear McCreary is a composer that he has a long career. I don't know what his first sort of like jump into real hey, here's what we were doing, but where he gets credited from horror that I can think of that was like important was Wrong Turn, which is another horror franchise, which is it's kind of cool. But Wrong Turn is definitely one of those like the music matters. He has done movies like The Forest. He did The Boy. He did 10 Cloverfield Lane. He did the Godzilla movie. He did Hellfest. He did Happy Death Day. What else did he do? Child's Play, the re-release. He did Happy Death Day to You. I know that one. And Um, the Babysitter's Club, I do remember that. He also does a ton of TV. He did Black Sails, he did Constantine, he did Agents of Shield, he did Daybreak, he does even still he does The Walking Dead. Bear McCreary has a really long kind of history with excellence in musical score. And from a horror standpoint, even if you remove horror, he's still amazing. But when you add the horror element to it, it becomes even more electric, even more important and essential. And his skill at creating mood is absolutely visceral. Um, I think the series that was called Damien is one of my favorite, so underrated. It was supposed to be the TV answer to The Omen. And Damien is an older person and he's running away from the idea that he's the Antichrist. It's absolutely good. I have no idea why it didn't get better ratings, but the music in Damien is exactly what I'm talking about. Everything is at the right note. Everything works and it doesn't feel out of place except where it's supposed to. It lends itself to terror when terror needs to be there, but it gives so much room for the audience to experience things through the horror narrative with the music that I feel like we would just be we would be poorer for, we would be less rich for. Um, and as we go forward, I can see that this man is that his illustrious already career is kind of the stuff of legend. It is the kind of thing that we'll be talking about, kind of like, oh, remember John Williams and how, his iconic symphony piece worked? Yeah, I can see that Bear McCreary is in that same caliber of greatness. And the amount of horror fiction that he has done composing scores for is just, it's huge. It's a massive, massive amount. So I chose him as my number one. Lots of technical stuff, lots of good, I think, reminders in his music that horror is about not just costumes, not just writing, not just direction, not just production. It's about all of the mood that goes into it, and music is such an essential part of it. So there you go.
I think one of the things that we learned tonight going through our list is, like you said, horror is not just putting the words on paper. It's not just making sure the lighting's just right. It's not any one thing as much as a concerted team effort to make sure atmosphere, to make sure mood, to make sure everything is set in such a way that it leaves you feeling just slightly uneasy, just enough to where when it's time for the scares to come, it won't just jump up and smack you, but it will grab you by your core and possibly affect you forever.
Yeah, and most of us have a horror movie that we saw when we were younger that influenced us for the rest of our lives. That we slept for a week with the lights on. That we wouldn't do certain things because they reminded us of the movie. But as we get older, we get more and more jaded by, or maybe not jaded, but we get more and more desensitized to both levels of violence and sort of our understanding that the world is the world, and there are, if you don't believe in supernatural entities, you go about your life, watching ghost stories, not feeling particularly terrified by a ghost story. But every once in a while, something comes along and it upends your idea of what you may or may not have thought about whatever that item is. And you experience a sense of dread because the narrative has chosen exactly the right way to communicate it, whether it's with music, whether it's with costumes like Pennywise, what you were saying, whether it's with some kind of practical effect or an advanced CG experience, whatever it is, we get the sensation that, oh, maybe I'm not as safe as I thought I was in my little cocooned world. Um, Final Destination does that for me often, not because it's scary that death is coming for me. Yes, death is coming for us all. Eventually, we are all going to die. Okay. But the idea that there is an order behind death is it's freaky. It's kind of scary. Um those kinds of things can be made even more scary by using the right music, by creating the right mood, by using the right props, by all of the things that we just talked about. And when we set the stage for good horror, it almost always relies on several small things, not one big thing. So I think that this list was actually it was a great list. There was a lot of cool things in it.
So how about we recap what your list is?
Oh my gosh. I am so sorry, but my list is now completely and totally messed up. I was doing something and my list is completely now it's really, really, really messed up. Uh so no boy. So I actually don't have my whole list together. I'm so sorry.
So I
But you
guess
could do your list. You could do your list, and I'll just I'll yeah I'll be happy to hear it. Go.
all right. My number 10, as demonstrated by the faculty, it is Kevin Williamson. My number 9, as seen in The Exorcist, the makeup work of Dick Smith. Number 8, the man, the myth, the legend, the master, Bruce Campbell. My name is Bruce. Number 7, building on his potential for future work as well as the work he's already done, Jordan Peele, and I put Get Out. Number 6, just because I like this movie a lot, it is the producing work of Jason Blum. Number 5, John Carpenter, as seen in They Live, for directing. Number 4, I put down Dreamcatcher to show off the uh, Stephen King. Yeah, show off the Stephen King. Number 3, following the Stephen pattern, Jaws, and Steven Spielberg is my master of horror there. Number 2, Alfred Hitchcock, master of horror with Psycho, and number 1, a Genway tie. It is Wes Craven and Robert Englund, and with an asterisk, everybody that helped make A Nightmare on Elm Street took my top spot as the masters of horror.
And okay, so I'll go through the ones that I remember. They're not in any particular order, although the top might be. I have Bruce Campbell for
Mm-hmm.
Evil Dead. I have Sam Raimi for
Yeah.
everything that Sam Raimi has done. I had Scream Queen Fay Ray, who I loved. Hammer Films, Mike Flanagan, A24 as the
Mm-hmm.
production for indie horror movies. Uh, Lovecraft and Bear McCreary. I know I'm missing 3
Eco?
off of there. What's that?
Eco?
Oh, that's right. My costume designer. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure who else I had on there. Maybe one other person, but I can't remember. Anyway,
I was going to say we got most of the way there.
I think we're only missing one other person. I'm so sorry. My computer is really screwing up here. Not that anybody here knows, but just before we came on the air, I had all of these technical issues that were happening. So lots of fun. I had my own little horror movie playing out in front of me, and technology it was great, really great.
Well, everybody knows it wouldn't be one of my shows without something just absolutely messing up at some points.
Truth. I feel like this is par for the course now. So
Well, why don't you go ahead and give us our homework assignments for next week?
okay. So we are gonna start out the month of November, which is our hopefully feeling like we're moving into the holidays kind of feeling without being too Christmassy. Because I gotta tell you, right off, I went to Target yesterday. I was not prepared for holiday 2022 already everywhere. It took me an hour to get through Target when all I really needed was milk and eggs. So yeah, so maybe we could slow that down just a little bit. Um, but I love November for a number of different reasons. One is obviously Thanksgiving is in here, but two, I really love the sense that once we're in November, we're sort of like winding down. The year is winding down, and it does actually make me feel a lot different, just about looking back at relationships and sort of having retro experiences. It's kind of nice. So I thought that for next week we could look back at the year 2022 and pick out our top 10 movies of the year. Can be in any order, in terms of like any different genre or whatever. You get to pick the criteria for however you decide to pick the movies that you thought were the best.
And we're talking the movies that were released in 2022.
Yes, released in 2022. If they were released direct to streaming, that's totally fine because obviously a lot of movies skipped theatrical cuts and went straight to HBO Max or Disney Plus or whatever.
Okay. Thanks to Letterboxd, which you can follow me at Skip Comic on Letterboxd. I have all of the movies that I have seen this year available in a couple of quick clicks.
So all you got to do is rank them.
Oh my god! Just out of curiosity, let's see. I'll sort by decade, 2020s, year, 2022. I have seen 43 films released this year. And sort by, let's see, highest rating first. Haha, cheating. Okay, I'll be honest. This is definitely not how I'm going to pick my, top movies of the year because, yeah, it's nice to know what I was thinking back when I first watched these movies, but looking at a second glance, I'll probably do some rearranging, and if it's that easy where I don't have to think about it, is it really worth it? So no, I'm not going to just sort my highest rated movies. That just seems unfair.
Yeah, I have some ideas about the movies that I've seen this year and what gives them standout moments in my brain about, because not all of them were like critically acclaimed or oh my gosh, this was the absolute most fabulous thing that I've ever seen. It is more along the lines of like there are some movies that came out this year which I feel like were incredibly underserved simply because they were released straight to streaming, but they're amazing. They're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's not on my top 10, but Glorious would be one of those movies simply because it came directly to Shudder, but it deserves no less accolades than some of the truly spectacular big budget movies that came out this year too.
And it looks like I'm going to have to watch a few more movies in the meantime, so I can bump up these numbers. Surprisingly, none of my movies that I've watched, I've given that coveted 5 stars to. It's all
Oh,
4.5 and lower. I will say this though, my lowest rated movie of the year, Moonfall. So far, I should say.
wow.
I should say so far, it's Moonfall.
As
So there's
a
that.
as a side note, I almost asked if you wanted to do the worst movies of the year, but I think I'll save that. We'll do the best first because it's November and spirit of giving and being charitable and equitable, and yeah, we'll start from there. See what happens.
Well, then there we have it, our homework for the year. And you know what? It's
And this one will definitely be part of the zeitgeist. Everybody will know all the movies that we're talking about for the most part, or they will be super easy to find because they're all new. So,
I look forward to that.
me too. Me too. Just so that you know, moviesandmeals.com. Yay, I'm finally this weekend. We're going to do our Halloween movie night. It's going to take place over 2 days, but we decided to showcase Sweeney Todd. So we are
Ooh.
making Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, which I can't wait to do. We're also, hopefully they'll taste a little bit better than Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, although I heard that they were the rage. We're also going to do homemade toffees and a couple of other inspired by the film ideas. We even have a station where we have whipped heavy cream that people can use to shave apples. I'm sure it's going to be super fun and very exciting, and I can't wait to share all of that with you on the blog. And then tomorrow night, we have the podcast TV Dinners.
Mhm.
And hopefully, TV Dinners this week will go off without a hitch, and we'll get to talk about TV tropes and some James Bond goodness. I'm hoping. I'm crossing my fingers. We'll see.
And if you're wondering what I'm up to, you can go to wadcomedia.com. Find me on Twitter at SkidComic. Go to Letterboxd, look for SkidComic. You'll see all of my 10 to 1 lists as we've done them over the last, several weeks. And if you're wondering what the podcast is about, Friday night at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, so am I. It's not 10 minutes before showtime. I don't know. But rest assured, Brandon and I will find something to talk about when as it relates to writers, actors, and directors. It's one of those things that most of the time you just gotta tune in and see where the conversation goes. Although, we usually have a general topic of conversation that we'd like to get to at some point. I saw Black Adam. I'm telling Brandon he needs to see Black Adam. So chances are we'll have some sort of review of Black Adam.
Oh boy.
So I hope you look forward to hearing our thoughts on that.
Hey, one
yeah.
last closing thought. Because this was all about horror, exciting news from HBO Max. Barbarian is now on HBO Max. As a horror film, it is one of the most talked about horror films of the year. And I haven't seen, because I've purposefully been staying away from a lot of online chatter, I didn't get to go see it in the theater. But it definitely looks pretty spooky, kind of scary.
It's on my watch list. I plan on
Right.
getting that one knocked out. And maybe it'll make next week's best movies of the year.
Yeah, that would be exciting.
So thank you, Jen, for putting together not only a well thought out and curated list, but filling our heads with informative thoughts, facts, and opinions when it comes to said lists. And thank you for not, once again laughing me out of the building as I, try to get through my list that is honestly, I have a good list, but you have a great list.
Between the two of us, I think we actually covered far more bases than I thought we would cover. So I don't think that your list was necessarily not good. I think it actually filled in all of the places where we needed to have horror filled in, where a top 10 list simply would come up short. So good job. I honestly, I feel very accomplished between the two of us with our lists. Love it.
Just want to do a special shout out to another big fan of the show, Jamie Lee Curtis. You know, you're always in our hearts when it comes to thinking of these things, right?
Yeah, yes. Our heart is with you. I'm so sorry about the last Halloween film.
And one notable exception that I guess I'm going to give this honorary shout out to. And I could have sworn one of us. I figured of both of us, you probably would have mentioned him because I would have, if I had known you wouldn't. Vincent Price, I'm sorry.
Well, okay, so we could sort of add Vincent Price to. We could add Vincent Price to the Hammer films because Vincent Price was in Theater of Blood, Madhouse. What was the other one? The Dr. Phoebes. Yeah, he was in a bunch of them. So he was in a whole bunch of Hammer films. We'll
perfect
lump him in there. Vincent Price, you have an honorary place on our list.
Nice. And also to another longtime listener of the show, no, Tim Burton, no. Creepy is not horror. Spooky is not horror directly. No. So, okay. Yeah, so, there's that. So,
although Sweeney Todd definitely makes the list.
Yes.
Sweeney Todd is a horror movie. So he gets a little bit of accolades there.
But not a master.
But no, sorry.
Not a master.
No.
So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will be back again next week with our top 10 lists of our favorite movies of 2022. That's this year. And
yes.
We hope to see you there. If you feel like dropping those lists on us so we can read them on the show, feel free to do that. Either here on the Facebook page, the YouTube page, Twitch channel, whatever the case may be, do it, and we'll go ahead and see what your favorites are for the year as well. In the meantime, I'm Jen. No, I'm Josh. Yeah, the second time that's happened today.
That's fine. You can be me. It's all right.
Okay, I'm Jen. That's Josh, and we hope you have a tremendous week.